this presentation on worker self-directed nonprofits and the law. I'll be presenting along with my coworker, Tia. She is an attorney in the state of California. I am not either an attorney. I am in the state of California, but my role here at the Law Center is as the Director of Operations and miscellaneous stuff. As many of you know, our roles at the Law Center include both programmatic and operations roles. So I do lots of operations, but I also work very closely with our worker self-directed nonprofit circle, including our nonprofit democracy network and our year-long learning journey called Collaborate to Co-Liberate. I've worked in nonprofits probably the last 25 years and different programmatic and operational roles. And I consider the Law Center to be my professional destiny because while I've worked in lots of collaborative projects and collectives, co-housing in my personal life, SELC was the first place that I was invited to participate in a deeply democratic and non-hierarchical workplace. And I'm here to share what I've learned both as somebody who's transitioned from traditional nonprofits into the Law Center, and also as somebody who's worked really closely with a lot of nonprofits around the country to become more deeply democratic and to structure in the way that we call worker self-directed. Tia, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and what brings you here?
Sure, thanks, Sue. I'm Tia. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the director of legal education at the Law Center, and I am in a few circles. I'm on the financial circle where we do like our bookkeeping and payroll. I'm on the legal cafe circle where we host events like this, and also like our legal clinics where we provide legal advice to people who are starting worker co-ops, housing co-ops, worker self-directed nonprofits, and other awesome projects. And I am also in the communication circle that does our newsletters and our social media. And so I am going to go back 2 slides because I need to tell you that this is part of the Community Over Chaos grassroots fundraising campaign. We are hosting a bunch of events in August. This is the first one, and they are all sponsored by these donors. And we are also fundraising from our individual supporters. So if you are if you are, moved to donate today after this event, please do at the Community Over Chaos campaign page. I think, oh, yes, I'm also a lawyer. Like Sue said, I've been a lawyer since, I don't know, 2011. And that means I can supervise legal apprentices. And we have some of those at the Law Center. And what else do I do? Oh, I have some clients in our land stewardship circle. I don't do a lot of worker self-directed nonprofit legal advising. Sue does more than I do, but I have a lot of experience being at the Law Center. I've been here for 6 years now, so everything I say is about, in this presentation, is mostly about the law or my experience at the Law Center, and then the other examples will be from Sue. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Tia. I'll go over our agenda really quick. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is a WSDN, how one organization can become or can form as a worker self-directed nonprofit. Tia is going to go over some of that, and then talk about the legal duties of the board and how they might differ. That's a lot of where we get pushback from organizations of like, oh, but we have to. And Tia's going to do some clarity about what is the law and what we've been taught as best practices for boards. And then we're going to talk a little bit about navigating conflicts of interest. And then I'll talk a little bit about what's unique in a WSDN around HR issues. And I might pull in my coworker who I see is in attendance that helped me with this slide, Elizabeth Burnett. She's sort of our resident go-to for HR and legal questions. And then we'll leave some time for questions and answers. I think Tia put in the chat how one applies for the MCLE that's available for this. If you have any oh, she just did it again. Look at that. If you have any questions, please pop in or hold them for that and ending questions. Oh, I guess you can't pop in right in a webinar. We have to give them permission to speak. So we'll take questions at the end. All right, so here's a definition that we came up with quite some time ago about what is a WSDN. And you'll see most of them have to do with having more control over the work you do, how it gets done, the conditions of our workplace, how we actually advance or change our skills in the workplace, and most importantly, the direction of the organization as a whole, rather than that being held at some executive branch or leadership team or at the board. It is spread out amongst our entire staff, and lots of different ways to structure about who makes what decisions. But for the most part, the law center, we're pretty much responsible for all of the decisions that affect all of the organization. Decisions that affect smaller groups of people are made at smaller group levels. And we find that to be sort of our benchmark of about who should make this decision. We have a theory that the people most affected by the decision should make the decision. What is a WSDN to you, Tia?
Let me think. So the definition that I usually use to describe to people where I work is that it's like if a worker cooperative and a nonprofit organization had a baby, and because we can't be a worker cooperative corporation because we have nonprofit status and we can't be owned by the workers of the nonprofit, but we are run like a cooperative in that we are horizontally run, we have equitable pay, and we have distributed leadership and responsibilities. So that's the cooperative part. And then the nonprofit part is that we do nonprofit type stuff. Like we have policy advocacy and we do legal advising for clients who would have trouble finding lawyers to help them with their specific question around the solidarity economy, and other nonprofit type stuff like education.
I love that nonprofit type stuff. Yeah, let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the core aspects of worker self-direction. And this is kind of a long laundry list too, but I'm just going to go over them really quickly. Most importantly to me, there's many centers of power. Most of us have worked in nonprofit organizations, know that the power, like in a corporate structure, is concentrated at the top, and it can also often create bottlenecks for programmatic decision making, because that process can sometimes be out of touch with the work that needs to, or just take too long for it to really be a dynamic solution to the issues that we're trying to address. The flexible and dynamic roles are really important. So we all have job titles, just like any other organization, but those job titles aren't fixed in or don't dictate the only kind of work we can do. For example, I'm the director of operations, but I also do programmatic work. I also work on our legal fellowship program. I'm not tied only to operational roles. What other core aspects are important to you, Tia?
For me, what really inspires me to work at a WSDN is the inclusive decision making, the liberatory compensation policies, and the upskilling. So, oh yeah, something I didn't mention about what it means to me to be in a WSDN is that my days are not monotonous because I have many roles. Like a few weeks ago when we were in audit season, I was working a lot on QuickBooks and with our bookkeepers. And then last week, I was doing a lot of conflict resolution type conversations. Maybe the week before, I was probably scheduling these MCLEs and trying to figure out with Hope who the interpreters might be and which MCLEs needed interpreters. So I had to learn a bunch of things that I wouldn't have learned in law school. And I do things that I didn't expect to be doing, like washing dishes and putting dishes away. And let me see, hold on. The next slide is what a traditional nonprofit looks like usually, right? On top, there's an important person who raises money, and then below them are a bunch of underappreciated people who don't make as much money. And then all the way on the bottom are people who need more support to do things. And then what some people call paper pushers. So we do not have that. And that is really important to me. It's like soul crushing to be in an organization like that for me. Do you want me to go back to the last slide? Were there other things you wanted to?
No, I was just gonna say in terms of that traditional hierarchy is that usually in a lot of direct service nonprofits, the people actually working with the clients are down there at the bottom, right? And that's what I mean about people that are most affected by decisions actually get to make the decisions, right? So if we think of our clients as some of the most important people, we want the people that are most directly interacting with them to have the most say in how things get decided and why this law center does things the way they do. And since all of us work with clients, all of us also are qualified to speak on behalf of our clients. And this is a great drawing that Janelle Orsi, our former executive director, drew to sort of exhibit how we think about the nonprofit, the worker self-directed nonprofit. And I like to be clear at this point, we do have a hierarchy. We call it a hierarchy of roles. So for example, Hope is the expert in all things presentations in Zoom. So she might have directed us this morning on how to do certain things or how to make something happen. But the next day we could be in a meeting that's about our database, which I have some expertise and investment in it being managed well. And so I might be able to direct her in how to do something in terms of the database. So it's a hierarchy of roles, not a hierarchy of people. None of us are in a static relationship where I have power over anyone. Do you want to say a little bit about the liberatory compensation policy? Because I think we take it for granted at Self, but I think it's one of the most revolutionary things.
Totally. Yeah. When Sue and I both started here at the law center, everyone was paid the same salary. I think it was like what the median income was for the Bay for Oakland. And since then, we have evolved our compensation policies to make it more needs-based. And this decision happened with a bunch of conversations and some proposals where all of the staff members voted, well, first asked questions and processed the proposal, and then voted to adopt a needs-based salary calculator where we all make at least the living wage that is described by the MIT living wage calculator. And we make a little more for savings and for fun. And then for people who have dependents or other expenses, they get a little bit more, like for childcare. So yeah, that's super important to me because it's like it's not about how much you're respected by your boss or how much your coworkers think you are worth in the free market. It's just based on needs, and it's very transparent. We all know how much our coworkers make.
Yeah, and we've had, I know it was for me, the experience of being hired on to the staff at the law center was so liberatory just in its process, right? That I didn't have to try to sell myself to get the most money I could possibly get because I'm never going to get another raise or it's going to be years before I could get an increase in salary. It was just like, this is what we pay, and we value you as a very experienced nonprofit operations person and programmatic person, trainer, facilitator, just as much as we value the time of a lawyer.
Mhm.
And that is the world I want to live in, where we're valued for our skills, regardless of their value in the market, the capitalist market. So
Exactly.
great. And so, yeah, we're happy. We look happy because we are happy. Many of us have a lot of longevity. I've been at the law center for 7 years. Tia, what, 6?
Mhm.
Yeah. There's several employees that have been at the law center longer than us. Um, so you probably want to come become a WSDN yourself. And Tia's going to tell you how to either work with your current board to become a worker self-directed nonprofit, or if you're forming a new nonprofit, how to help an organization do that.
Exactly. Thanks, Sue. All right. So, how to become a worker self-directed nonprofit. Step one is to get your board of directors to delegate control to workers. And delegating control isn't something that is rare for board of directors to do. They usually just delegate control to one worker, the executive director, who then delegates different responsibilities to HR and to managers. But for this MCLE, we're only talking about the legal ways to become a WSDN. Of course, there are many steps. If you're like currently an employee of a traditional nonprofit with a rigid hierarchy, you'd have to organize your coworkers to convince the managers, to convince the ED, to convince the board. But assuming you already have the board on board, once you convince them to delegate, there are two ways to legally become a WSDN. The first way is for the board to pass a resolution. So they can start with using just standard nonprofit bylaws. Then they can formally make your nonprofit a WSDN by passing a resolution to delegate management authority to all the staff members. This is actually how the Law Center became a WSDN, and staff members can then create internal policies for co-governance. So here on slide 11, I copied and pasted a sample board resolution, and a link to it is in the resources section, so you don't have to actually squint to read it. Since Sue has worked with WSDN clients more than me, I invite you to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages to becoming a WSDN by resolution.
Yeah, I mean, one of the advantages is that the staff can use any process they want to create and change their policies. They don't have to work with the bylaws so much. The other advantage is that it's sometimes expedient. I think that's why the law center has done that, did do it that way, is that back when the founders were starting the organization, they really wanted to get it up and running and hadn't thought through all the issues that they might need to make nonprofit bylaws that reflected worker self-direction. So yeah, and so we've chosen to just keep doing this because it works for us. We also had the advantage to having a board that was completely 130% on board with worker self-direction. So that was not an issue for us. But that is the disadvantage, is that boards could change their mind, right? You could have board members who are unhappy with the idea of worker self-direction, and they could choose not to pass the resolution someday in the future or in the present, or they could reverse their decision to delegate within. We do it annually, so the board passes this resolution annually.
Thanks, Sue. So the another legal option for delegating control to workers is for the board to formally delegate power to the staff in the bylaws. So the bylaws could set minimum requirements of self-direction, could lay out duties of staff, describe the oversight role of the board, and formalize things such as termination policies. Sue, do you want to share anything about the strengths and challenges of becoming a WSDN by baking it into the bylaws?
Yeah, kind of like I said about the last one, it does bake the strategy into the bylaws, right? In order to not be a worker self-directed nonprofit anymore, you'd have to change the bylaws. So it would not prevent, but certainly make it much harder for a board that wasn't on board, to unintentionally or intentionally take the organization back over. I think the strategy, as I mentioned also, is it takes a lot of thinking. It's not just the government documents, but it's operational, right? So you have to think a lot about how you want the organization to run, how they want to operate in order to write these bylaws. So there's a lot of work on the front end to do this. But it might be worth it if, especially if you're starting a new organization or you're really revamping your current organization. Um, yeah,
Thanks, Sue. Right. Okay, so what needs to be in the bylaws for WSDNs if you are going to try to bake it in? Well, or for all bylaws really. You have some legal requirements by the state of California, like the number of board members, the method of director selection, officer roles, and the schedules of board meetings. And then there are some things required for tax exemption. For your 501(c)(3) status, you'll need a purpose clause, a dissolution clause. There are some things that aren't actually legally required, but are practically needed to get your organization going. And then there are some things needed for your tax return so that you don't raise red flags with the IRS. And we have a handy dandy bylaws toolkit for those of you who want to take this second route of baking worker self-direction into your bylaws. I took this chart from that toolkit, and there are many other things in the toolkit that Sue might want to describe a little bit.
yeah. The toolkits are downloadable, so it has templates, how you can start your self-governing organization or start the project to rewrite your bylaws. And it allows you to root your bylaws very much in your values, politics, whatever the organization really believes in. It's quite a statement to write these into your bylaws. Um, it's also going to help you direct you in conversations that are super important about how you'll make decisions, how you'll balance power between your stakeholders, the role of the board, the role of the staff, the role of the clients, or any other input that you want to take from your community. So like I said before, it's really about how you're going to operate in order to make sure that these bylaws are saying what you want them to say. Because once you've written them and had them, ratified, they're going to be the boundaries by which you operate this organization and by which everybody's roles get laid out. And so, and they can set up a situation where you're created legal liability that you didn't expect. So it's not something to rush into, but to take a lot of time. And the toolkit was put together by some of our former coworkers, Chris Tittle and Simon Mott, and again, based in um, California law, but also according to many national statutes that you'll have to consider when writing those bylaws.
Thank you, Sue. And again, the link to the bylaws toolkit and the video kind of explaining how to use the bylaws toolkit will be in the resources in the slides that I sent in the. All right, so let's talk about the board of directors, since they're the ones with the power to form a nonprofit as a WSDN or to convert a traditional one into a WSDN. Okay, what is a board? A board of directors is a group of people that exercise the official powers of a nonprofit corporation. And nonprofit corporations are required by state law to have a board of directors who have the ultimate authority to act on behalf of the organization. Section 5213 of the California Corporations Code, for example, requires that a nonprofit board must have either a chairperson or a president or both, a secretary, and a treasurer or a chief financial officer or both. Typically, a board's function is to set visions, develop strategy, set policies for effective operations and planning, monitor and evaluate programs, raise funds, support financial planning, ensure legal and ethical integrity, and enhance the nonprofit's public standing. And none of these traditional functions are codified into the law. One of the most important functions of a traditional board of directors is to pick an executive director. The executive director will then carry out the visions and long-term strategy that is set by the board. In other words, the board defines the ends of the organization while the executive director determines the means. The board then reviews the behavior of the executive director to ensure the means match the ends. Again, this function is also not codified into law. There is nothing in the law that says a nonprofit must have an executive director. Oh, and Sue will describe the slide image for visually impaired folks. You're on mute, Sue.
Sorry about that. It's a monochromatic visual of people sitting around a table that says the word board on top of it. And one person says, this in a speech bubble says SELC's mission should be to provide legal services to groups trying to start cooperatives. And another member sitting around the table in a speech bubble says, I know the perfect person who can be SELC's executive director. They may have experience needed to manage a staff of lawyers. And yeah, that's the visual.
Thank
And
you.
I just want to say, Tia, that this is a model that is very much taken from corporate structure, right? Where we have a CEO or whatever. And just to remind everybody, but that corporate structure is based on military structure. And most of us don't want to mimic those structures in the organizations that we're working so hard to bring about equity and justice in the world.
Exactly. Thank you, Sue. And just for context, most of I mean, all of the other slides were mostly decorative or just had words that we were reading anyway. So the slides that have pictures that kind of explain what I'm trying to say or illustrate what I'm trying to say, Sue will describe. And we figured out that earlier. Okay, so a WSDN board is much different. In a WSDN, the board plays a more supportive and less directive role. Here, unlike in the previous slide, the board members support SELC staff in determining what the mission should be. A WSDN board also enables flexible and dynamic responses because information does not have to travel up a hierarchy to be approved before a staff member can act on an opportunity. Sorry, so you're on mute again.
I'm so sorry. And this visual has a picture of people sitting around a table with rainbow colored shirts, smiling. And one person says, SELC's mission should be to provide legal services to groups trying to start cooperatives. And another member in a speech bubble says, that's right, because that's what SELC staff decided the mission should be. And then a third member says, I hear that some of the staff members want to work on land rematriation too.
Thanks, Sue. All right, so board of directors have to fulfill two core duties. as expressed in the California Corporations Code, the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. When a board member fails to fulfill these duties, they can be personally liable and the whole organization can be exposed to some risk. Under no circumstances can the board abdicate or delegate away these two duties. It doesn't matter if it's a traditional nonprofit or a WSDN, the board has to watch over the activities of the nonprofit. The duty of care requires that board members do what this group of cartoon members is doing. They have to stay informed of what the nonprofit is doing, make sure that it's actually working toward its mission, and make sure it doesn't do something foolish and lose all its money. And that's just what the board members are saying on this slide. Board members don't have to be geniuses or spot every possible issue. They just have to act like a reasonable person. They can rely on the advice of others, including the staff, and they won't suffer liability as long as they use their best business judgment. Now, the duty of loyalty requires board members to act in a manner that they reasonably believe is in the best interest of the organization and to appropriately handle any situation where a conflict of interest arises related to something like compensation, use of the organization's property or confidential information, or material benefit to an individual arising out of their position within the charity. So this resource talks more about specific practices that can ensure that the board fulfills both of these duties of care and loyalty. So given those duties, there are ways we have to navigate conflicts of interest. The Section 5227 and Section 5233 of the California Corporations Code address conflicts of interest in nonprofits. We call them the 49% rule and the self-dealing rule. The 49% rule is that not more than 49% of a nonprofit's governing body may be composed of interested directors. And an interested director is someone who has been compensated by the corporation for services within the last 12 months and any member of such a person's family. At Silk, we reserve board seats that must be filled by paid staff to ensure that there's a direct line of communication between staff and board members. The 49% rule makes it such that not more than 49% of our board, though, can be composed of staff members. And then there's the self-dealing rule. A self-dealing transaction is a transaction to which the nonprofit is a party and in which one or more directors has a material financial interest. Generally, self-dealing transactions are permitted if the transaction is fair and reasonable and pre-approved by a disinterested majority of the board. So just because there's a transaction that may appear self-dealing, there are ways to make it pass. Then there's the self-dealing rule in the federal tax law. It addresses conflicts of interest in Section 4958 of the Internal Revenue Code, which prohibits excess benefit transactions between insiders and a charity, such as its directors, officers, and key employees, and the charity. Usually, insiders is understood to mean CEOs, COOs, treasurers, and the like, but it also means an individual serving on the governing body of the organization who is entitled to vote on any matter over which the governing body has authority. So an insider is also someone who has or shares authority to control or determine a substantial portion of the organization's capital expenditures, operating budget, or compensation for employees. In a WSDN, that could be any staff member. So this is a gray area, and whether your collective members are insiders or not might have something to do with how big your organization is. For example, at the Law Center, I have 17 coworkers. Arguably, each person only has 1/18th portion of the influence, and whether that's substantial or not, we'd have to, learn if this problem arises. It seems like whether my coworkers are insiders or not can be argued either way. Assuming we're insiders, the test for whether a transaction is an excess benefit transaction is fairly simple. It exists if the value of the benefit conferred on the insider exceeds the value of what the organization has received in return at the time the contract is made. You should look at what similar organizations are paying for similar services, document that, and then pay your insiders the same or less. To help you navigate these conflicts of interest, we drafted a super simple sample of a conflict and convergence of interest policy. And you can find that here in our legal guide on how to navigate conflicts of interest. And there's a 4-minute video also of how conflict of interest policies are annoying and how to deal with that. All
Thank you
right.
so much, Tia. I learned a little bit there. I didn't know all of that, so thank you.
Great.
Um, so this is a few notes. We're shifting into sort of operational stuff and a few notes about HR and WSDNs, which is another place where legal issues or questions or pushback about the validity of WSDNs come up. Particularly around supervision, we're extra careful. In California, we require all staff to take the supervisor training around anti-sexual harassment. It's a 2-hour training as opposed to the regular employee training that's only 1 hour. And not that that's fun, or not all of us enjoy watching that every year, but we're erring on the safe side because we feel like we're all supervisors, right? We're peer led. We're all directing each other. There's no hierarchy. And then we have adopted the policy, or not maybe just a guideline around praising each other in public and critiquing each other in private. And Tia, I know that's important to you. Is there something more you want to say about that one?
Yes, I am a strong proponent of compassionate, constructive gossip. And so one way we gossip at the Law Center is by um, using our coworker love channel. And we like tell everyone about something that they probably don't know about because they're not working with one of your coworkers that you're trying to give love to. And we just appreciate them. Or sometimes it's just their birthday and you tell people things that you like about them that your coworkers might not have known. And I love that. And then for critiquing, we have a what do you call it? Like a communication style guide for communication profile that we're supposed to fill when we are hired at the law center on how we like to deal with conflict. And then we have recently updated those at a staff retreat. And so when you have a conflict with someone or you want to critique someone, you look to their profile and see how they like to be given feedback. And a lot of people have chosen to have that be done in private. And so that's just something we try to respect.
Yeah. And I think one of the really important parts of that for me is that the first when you look at our conflict engagement guidelines, the first one is go talk to the person, right? Which seems like such basic, human interaction, but it's hard, right? But really encouraging each other to just try to talk it out before you get a process involved in conflict management. So often that one-on-one initial conversation doesn't happen and things blossom into other kind of conflict. The other thing we like to remind folks around WSDN HR is pay and personnel files are transparent, except where required by law. But it's very important that you put that in your policies so that everyone knows that's happening, right? Lots of people are kind of blown away by our pay structure, but the other part of our pay structure is everybody knows what everybody makes. And that's fine because we've created a system that we've all agreed upon that is fair. So make sure that it's stated in your personnel policies that there's no expectation of privacy. Some privacy is required by law, and we do follow that. For example, health records And those reasons for requests for accommodations that might be related to those health records are private. Social security numbers, all that kind of security basics are saved in a separate drive that only HR folks have access to, not the whole staff. And again, with conflicts, they're not private, except where there's a direct request by the persons in the conflict to not share with the rest of the staff. Or if there's a legal claim that requires privacy. And that how we manage accountability amongst us is at our circle levels. So our circles are what in a lot of nonprofits would be called departments or program staff, or project teams. And your accountability is to that team. So for example, if I want to go on vacation, I don't have to ask my boss, I have to ask my teams. Or tell my teams, this is my plan. Is there anything, and this is how I'm going to get my work covered. Is there anything I haven't thought of that the team would need me to be accountable for in order to take this time off? Right? So that's one way in which our accountability isn't to a higher up, it's to our coworkers. And then on just another note about the equitable pay is based on the cost of living in your region and your dependent responsibilities. Is there anything else about the equitable pay you want to talk about, Tia? Since Tia was the chief designer of our equitable pay worksheet that helps us all